Hi everyone. Today I am joined by Swagata, a principal data scientist, a thought leader in responsible and ethical AI, and an active voice in empowering women in tech. With nearly a decade of experience across AI, data science, and software engineering, she is not only driving innovation at Boomi, but also building communities through Women in Data and TechWalk. She is a chapter lead of Women in Data and a community that empowers and supports women in data science and related fields. She also hosts the Data Dojo podcast, where she decodes data dreams differently. I am so excited to dive into her journey and perspectives on shaping the future of AI. Hi, Swagata. Welcome to Latency and Latte. Thank you for making the time. Let's talk about responsible AI. Some people still see it as a new concept, but the truth is, it's already shaping how enterprises build, scale, and trust AI systems. And honestly, it's not just about tech, it's about people, policy, and principles, right?
Right.
Let's start right at the top. When you talk about responsible AI, what does that mean to you? How do you explain it to someone who's not living in the AI world? So,
Mm-hmm.
just before we start, how do I feel? Just help me recollect my thoughts here. I sometimes describe it as a nutrition label for AI. It tells you what's inside, and sometimes it's safe to consume if it's safe to consume. So, yeah,
I
and
think, yeah, you put it well. I don't think I can improvise on that, but just to elaborate on it a little bit, it
Mhm,
is still fairly, it's not a new concept, but it is definitely something that enterprises do not prioritize at the beginning. And it's so
mhm,
important and fundamental because when I say responsible AI,
mhm,
there are key fundamental aspects to it, like the explainability and transparency, of course, a lot of people are aware of, but
mhm,
also a concept of bias, right?
mhm.
And our data innately has a lot of biases because of the biases that exist in the world. So
Right.
gender bias and like racial bias, so many things
Yeah.
that exist in our training data as well. And if
Mhm,
you don't put responsible AI at the beginning of building something,
mhm.
then it's too late before production. And like because the data, the models and everything, it's trained on the data itself, which already has the bias.
Right.
So I think key aspect, explainability, transparency is something that you can still add after
Mhm,
your core system is ready. But the
mhm.
data part has to be something that has to be handled before even you start working on it.
Right.
So, yeah, bias, transparency, explainability are the key concepts of responsible AI
Mhm.
that enterprises have to and must work on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's great, Swagata. Why do you think responsible AI is not just a good to have anymore, but actually a business critical requirement?
Yeah. So, a couple of reasons. First is that we've talked about AI and machine learning models being a black box for a very long time. And
Mhm,
as these AI models are maturing, there are so many things that are available right now. The
mhm,
only differentiating aspect is like even if you use ChatGPT and all these advanced models, they have this thinking, like what they are thinking, and even perplexity that
mhm,
cites the resources, what information it's giving. So, it gives the user a sort of confidence to trust your responses, and if
mhm,
you show the thinking, like, why are you telling me something?
mhm,
It just gives more trust and increase your user retention. So, given that the maturity we have achieved with AI today, it's an absolute must have. If 2 years ago when these models were still coming up, it's okay, not a mandatory thing. But now this is the fundamental thing that's going to differentiate you, make users trust your product more and more. And
mhm,
also the bias part that I talked about, right? Like if I ask ChatGPT a joke about women versus a man, I can see that there is still a little bit of bias in like a nurse is assumed to be a female and a doctor is assumed to be a man. So those
mhm.
kind of biases, because it exists in our data, that has to be trained because it's really disrespectful to certain genders or races, and that has to be removed in order to differentiate and make your product really solid and trustable.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree because this is what already there in the data, and the models are training on that data. So we need to take into that consideration. And I believe companies should treat responsible AI as a launch requirement rather than a
Right,
life cycle commitment, right? So
right,
sometimes it's a continuous missing accountability, especially post deployment.
right.
So I think yes, I completely understand that it should be must to have lately. And I have seen models are start out fair, but they drift over time due to changing data patterns, and then
Correct.
suddenly the outputs no longer align with the original ethics
Yeah,
review.
yeah.
Yeah. So, as we are talking about biases in the real world, in your experience, what types of biases show up most often in enterprise AI, and are there any trained to surprise people?
Enterprise level, it really depends on the use case. For our company, for
Mhm.
example, we don't have any typical biases like gender or race or caste. So, but we do have biases based on what kind of interactions users use. So we are an iPaaS platform, and people create integration processes in our platform. And of course, the more common use cases that people build have, there is a bias on that, but that doesn't mean that is the most useful solution to a given user intent just because users have diverted to using that pathway. So we need to understand, like, because we want to provide the most efficient reply to the user, and
Mhm.
that is always not the most used one, right? Users can be using something which is inefficient. So we kind of play a balance in understanding what are the most common patterns that user use, and if it's not the most efficient one, we still recommend them and say that, hey, this is a very common use case, but here is how you can make it more efficient.
Mhm.
So we give them the process, like, this is a integration process you can use based on your request, but here is how you can make it better, and why do we say that, and why do we suggest that. So that covers, like, we are adhering to the data,
Mhm.
adhering to what maximum users are using. At the
Mhm.
same time, we are giving you an option if you want to improvise and make the cost efficient route, which is good for everybody, and we explain why we are recommending it. So that kind of covers everything: the bias, explainability.
Yeah. That's good. And I'm also new to this topic. I'm also learning with you. So, how do you fix these biases? I mean, now, what is the approach here?
Yeah, so I mean, fundamentally, like I said, like,
Mhm.
when you fine tune, like, let's say depending on your use case, you're using a Claude model as your
Mhm.
backend, so you can fine tune that with your own enterprise data. And
Mhm.
on top of that, what we do, we add like an explainability layer, because we know when we fine tune that data with our own proprietary use cases, there will be some biases that will exist. But we
Mhm.
also know that if we add that explainability, it can be as simple as a rule based engine, explainability, transparency, where with our own logic, we know that when case A is being requested, we also divert them to case B and C. I mean, it's much more complicated than that, but just to simplify. So you, after you fine tune with your own proprietary data, you add some sort of explainability to
Mhm.
adhere, and it can be simple rule based logic based on your own organization's biases that you have observed. Because there are also other option of using data, like synthetic data, but I
Mhm.
feel like that may or may not solve the purpose. It's good for POCs, it's not always. You need real life data to
Yeah.
really make a model solid. So I think this approach works better. You fine tune with your data and then add some sort of like filtering logic to divert it and make it more fair.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And explainability is non-negotiable here, I think. And I have been reading about responsible AI lately, and they were saying there are six pillars of responsible AI: fairness, non-discrimination, transparency and explainability, accountability,
Mm-hmm.
privacy and data governance, safety and security, and sustainability. So, would you
Yeah.
like to enhance it a little bit, or do you have any explanation on briefly about each topic, or more about the fundamental side, how companies can inculcate these
Yeah,
values?
I mean, a lot of times companies can start out with existing frameworks if they don't know. Like IBM has a 360 fairness framework that they can use, and different companies have, if they don't want to invest in building their own sort of suite. But there are a lot of startups that have come up with observability and governance and security. So that is also very important because, like you said, the model drifts over time, right? Even if you've established explainability, fairness, and all of these at the beginning, it can drift over time. So
Mhm.
observability, accountability, this becomes very natural and easy. So we use the AWS ecosystem completely for all our use cases, but there are multiple frameworks and startups that you can use. I think observability is very important in an ML life cycle in general, and that also comes up with a lot of fairness related metrics these days. So there are metrics that you can define to measure bias, transparency, if there is any bias towards one particular class that is happening. There are ways to investigate that, what particular intents cause that bias. You can dive deeper into observability, so that helps you keep track of if there is any drift that is happening through your product life cycle. And of course, explainability, we've already talked about it. Transparency, kind of similar bracket. But observability, I think there are hundreds of startups that have come up in the past 1 year because they identified that this is a loophole that enterprises are missing. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
So they're banking on that.
Yes.
And that's interesting. That's great. So sometimes there's always a tension between the fairness and accuracy, right? So how do you trade off without losing trust from stakeholders? So how do
Yeah,
you
I mean
trade?
that is it's a very like no one size fits all answer because it really depends on
Mm-hmm.
your use case and which industry you're in. When it
Mm-hmm.
comes to there was a use case that on the resume selection,
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't know if it was Amazon or some company that observed that with the same resume, I have the same credentials and there is a man who has the same credentials. That man's resume was getting more opportunities, etc. And that
Mm-hmm.
study really, that is a non-negotiable, right? That at that time bias cannot exist.
Right.
So but in our case, for example, like because our data is not very gender or caste or race dependent, the biases is not that important. I'm not saying it's I mean it's important, but we can have a little bit more wiggle room when it compared to accuracy versus
Right.
bias. So it really depends on your industry or use case.
Mm-hmm.
But finding that right trade-off really depends on which industry you are, what your size of the audience is. Yeah.
So do you think that varies from startups to tier two or tier three companies? Do you think that varies? Uh,
More than the size, I think it should the type of industry and type of data you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, okay, interesting. Because I have been also reading about the explainability, and explainability is often called a pillar of responsible AI,
Correct. Yeah.
right? So, would you like to dive deeper into the explainability? Are there any tools, or how can we inculcate that in our code or ethical uh, benchmarks?
Yeah, I mean, to start off with, like, there are libraries that you can start with. There are two called Sharp and Lime.
Okay.
And they are very simple concepts, like, if not on an enterprise scale, like, how they work is that they basically hyper superimpose your answers to a simpler model. So the concept of Lime is that if you don't want to understand this complicated model, let me understand the output based on a simple model. So it kind of superimposes that result in a simple model's regression line, and
Mm-hmm.
then gives you justification as to why, okay, feature A was important, that's why I predicted this. Feature B was important, like for, let's say, I'm doing a house price prediction problem,
Mm-hmm.
and location is very important. So that kind of because of it's in California, that's why your house price is very high.
Mm-hmm.
So adding that kind of explainability is very simple to do with libraries like Sharp and Lime. But on an enterprise grade level, you have to leverage, like, you can go with startup tools, or you can use AWS. Or AWS and all these cloud providers have an entire suite dedicated to responsible AI and governance and explainability. So you can
Mm-hmm.
add that layer to your model output, where you show the thinking process as to why you're recommending this, the cite the sources as to why this particular suggestion was made.
Right, right. So Sharp and Lime, these are the two libraries we can begin with.
For your projects, personal projects, I think that's a good start.
Great, great. So how do you make transparency meaningful for both engineers and non-technical decision makers?
Yeah, I mean that's very difficult because so when we started building this explainability layer, you need to understand to what level you need to show, because you don't want to overwhelm the end user with um, 10 different steps. I was thinking this because blah 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 blah. The customer might not be interested in diving so deep. It's a distraction. So it depends on the use case, but we did a lot of back and forth and came up with like a based on our user study, what is the sweet spot. Like, customers want to know, but because they are not very technical, they are
Mm-hmm.
okay with the surface level. For example, like the housing price example, it's
Mm-hmm.
enough for me to know that, okay, because of I live in California, that's why. I don't want to dive deep into the history of why the house prices in California started increasing,
Right.
etc.
Uh-huh.
So, but that level of detail might be useful for a developer or an engineering team, because they can fine tune and revise their model based on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. That's interesting. So let's shift gear a little bit here and talk about your own journey. how did you I have been hearing a couple of your podcasts where you were talking about you got a chance to go into a different coursework with CMU, and then how did you land into as a data scientist role, and now you are working as a principal data scientist with Boomi.
Right.
So can you help us walk through your journey, and how did you learn while working as a data scientist?
Yeah. So I came to US in 2017, and my master's was in something called as integrated innovation.
Right.
And the
Mhm.
reason I got intrigued by that course was because they had a Venn diagram which had engineering, business, and design, and
Mhm.
the overlap of those is what you will study. And at that time, it felt really intriguing. Like, I can be a
Yeah.
jack of all trades and be a generalist. But once I started doing the course, I was introduced to machine learning, because in CMU it's like everybody talks about
Yeah.
machine learning, and at that time it was sort of the hottest career. So I was
Yeah.
very intrigued by it, and I attended some courses. I took electives, and I decided that this is something I really enjoy, even though I did not like math at all growing up. But the
Mhm.
way it was taught, how it related to data was something new. I
Mhm.
find it very intriguing, so I decided to pivot. Luckily, at that time, the job market was fairly better, and I was able to get a starting job as an associate data scientist.
Mhm.
And I learned a lot on the job as well, because I did not have a lot of traditional training in
Mhm.
data science, maybe a couple of electives. So I did learn a lot in my job as well.
Mhm. That's great because I can see traditional machine learning is changing. Earlier, it was like more you are working on the model, then deployment, and then
Yeah,
there were feedback iteration. But now things are changing, and I think, as you said, that the coursework you had signed up for, it's more about the generalist, where business, product, engineering, all where
Mhm.
it's a fusion of everything. But I believe now the journalist is more
Yeah,
demanded, where
true.
you know exactly about the product. You know, now I have been working as a data into data analytics, then you can transition into product, then slowly you can transition into engineering side. So
Yeah,
this is what current requirement, I would say. So
yeah.
let's come back to the governance at scale. So that framework sound great in theory, but what's actually worked for scaling responsible AI practices across big global teams? What do you think?
I think to start off with, I'll say start with, I mean, it depends. If you I know of certain startups that do a really good job. So if you're not associated with a cloud provider already, I would say start with that, because
Mhm.
when you work with smaller startups, it gives you a little bit more flexibility, because they are not tied to you have to use this framework. You can create your own metrics that you feel are that work for you. You can work with them to give you hyperscaling and load balancing options. With big cloud enterprises, they have like tiers that you have to go with, and if you're just starting off, it might not make sense to jump off the wagon and go with
Right.
something really big. In our case, we were already partnered with a cloud provider, and we have seen the progression. So we had fairly good idea on how to scale it, and we did it in multiple phases. So we didn't deploy the explainability to all our product suite. We started with something which we knew will definitely add value. Once we saw a positive response, we had a thumbs up, thumbs down button, like whether it's useful or not, like
Right.
small things like that. And we did observe that, are the customers using our clicking on the thinking, because you can click on the show
Mhm.
thinking.
Mhm.
Is that feature being used or not? Is the thumbs up, thumbs down being used or not? Those were valuable metrics for us to understand. Okay, now we can scale it to
Mhm.
all different product suite, because we got a really positive feedback that we got to know through those metrics. So I think
Mhm.
a phased approach would be better. And if you're not tied to a cloud provider, start with smaller startups that
Mhm.
give you the flexibility of creating your own metrics, sizing your data as you go, better load balancing options.
Great. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting because I think it's like a DevOps. I feel like a governance should be built in, not bolted on.
Yeah,
So somewhere, yeah, yeah, I think more like now ML ops and LLM ops or things are also coming up. Yeah.
yeah,
So how about regulations and readiness? You know, with AI regulations, it's evolving so fast. Like the EU AI Act are coming up, and now I have been reading about the US has also there is some policies about AI and regulations. It's been coming out. So how can enterprises stay compliant without killing innovation?
yeah. That is very hard. I worked in
Mhm.
healthcare for a long time, so that,
Yeah.
I mean, with AI, I feel it's still easier because there is still a gray area as to like you don't know. We have for our teams we do have very strict SIAs, like where you have the architecture teams get involved,
Mm-hmm.
test the product rigorously of all the possible scenarios, ensure there is no prompt leakage, no PII that can ever leak, build layers of security and protection around it. We did have cases where, we had at the beginning of our initial release, we saw that not through a customer, luckily, we noticed it by ourselves where there's some prompt leakage that is happening. So even when you think that AI is safe and it's going to go all well, there is prompt leakage that can happen, there can be PII that can be leaked. So all of those things, and the different regulations that are coming up, it's difficult, but we have a dedicated team that rigorously tests that, all those scenarios. So yeah, I think that's the best way to do, have like an architect team
Mm-hmm.
which checks all the potential errors, no prompt leakage, no PII.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and especially when you're working with the healthcare, this is a deal breaker where all personal information and there are a lot of other act as well, and it's been leaking out. Then it's a uh, uh, biggest deal breaker. So I have a quick question here, just for my understanding. When it comes to healthcare, that's altogether different domain. So what could be the pillars, I would say, responsible AI should keep in, we should consider about responsible AI? For example, accuracy is definitely there, but if we are using something else, then fairness should be there in terms of the records, in terms of EHR records are there, all those things. So what would you think here? I mean, what could be the prominent pillars?
Yeah, I think healthcare is very, very. I mean, the thing is that with healthcare, all
Mm-hmm.
these different diseases, genders, all of them, you need to, for example, like cancer. There are different type of cancer that happen for women versus men. So
Yeah.
there is innate nature because of the biology of the system that there is a bias that exists. So
Mm-hmm.
even though you want to make your system fair, you need to understand that those biases are necessary because there are certain kind of like cancers that are more prominent in women. So
Yeah.
we did I have worked on building something when I was working in the healthcare industry, that kind of acts as an aid for physicians
Mm-hmm.
to give a recommendation based on the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
So and then based on symptoms, like even if you ask Google for
Mm-hmm.
every small thing, it can recommend something very
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
So not that that's cannot happen, but there is a very low probability if you have a headache, you can have something severe like a tumor. So those that aid that we built, we made sure that we adhere to the data,
Mm-hmm.
and maximum like 80-90% of the cases the headache is just a severe headache, nothing more than that.
Yeah.
So accuracy is important like you said, but accuracy can be really flawed, as we know as data scientists that accuracy is
Yeah.
trusting accuracy is just not a good way of building things. Precision, recall, all of
Yeah.
these holistic metrics are important. At the same time, to be fair, depending on healthcare or wherever, whichever industry you are, you need to
Mm-hmm.
be fair, but at the same time, the innate bias that exists because of the biology and healthcare,
Yeah.
different genders, that also has to be taken into account.
Mm-hmm.
And in healthcare it can always be an aid, like the human is so necessary in healthcare or such kind of highly regulated
Right.
systems, even in finance. So act as an aid, give a probabilistic distribution of what is possible, what's not possible, give the explanation of why you thought so, make it everything very data reliable,
Mm-hmm.
code the sources, etc. But ensure there is no PII, make it a generic model.
Yeah.
But definitely there is a human review that is needed that should never go away.
Absolutely. I mean, human intervention is important because eventually it's LLM and it should not get hallucinated when it comes to
Yeah, there's like
prescribing it.
absolutely no room for error when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah, even though you can do fine tuning, can put all those guardrails, it's very difficult. So yeah, that is another. Yeah, so Swagata, women in data, you represent women in data. So from your perspective, how can communities this influence responsible AI governance and make sure diverse voices are actually a part of decision making?
Yeah, I think that's a topic close to my heart. And the reason I joined, I mean, I am the chapter lead for SF. And interestingly, when I joined this community, you'll think of Bay Area being the, heart of innovation or like the epicenter of AI, but there
Mhm.
was no chapter in San Francisco Bay Area. So I thought better to, if not joining, I can just create a community and lead the community. And
Mhm.
it's been very, very promising. I've met incredible women who are doing great in spreading the word. And my whole agenda of joining and starting this community was, as you grow in your career in tech side especially, there are very few women voices in a
Yeah.
meeting room, decision making room. Women are not there.
Mhm.
They, I don't know the reason, but it's in marketing or HR, but in tech I've seen very less. I don't know
Mhm.
if the reasons are because they're scared to do technical work, or what is the reason. So we wanted to encourage them that tech is not that hard, and we need more voices in the decision making rooms.
Right.
So we host a lot of events to
Mhm.
spread awareness, and all our panels are by these exceptional women leaders, so that you get inspired when you see five or six women speaking about and decision making, and how they control the decision making in their particular companies. We do talk about responsible AI governance, but in general, generative AI has been a common theme, and we want to encourage more and more women to take up leadership roles. At the same
Mhm.
time, not leave the tech background, find the right balance between tech and leadership, so that
Mhm.
you have a right say at the table.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I have seen women are working in silos instead of just coming out and talking. They are really doing good work, but sometimes I'm not sure if they are afraid or they don't have that voice just to go out and talk on such platforms. So that is, I think, quite changing from past few years. Women are coming up, talking
Yeah,
about their problems. They are encouraging, motivating other people. I have been seeing that change. And
yeah.
thanks to you, you are working very hard, especially with this women
And
in
you as well, like
AI.
having this podcast and talking to amazing women.
Absolutely. I'm glad we are talking about this topic. And I have a quick question here. So, next 5 years, if we fast forward 5 years, what do you think will be the biggest shift in how companies approach responsible AI?
I think past in the next 2 to 3 years itself, less than 5 years,
Hmm.
responsible AI will become the key aspect of building a Gen AI system and architecture. So right now in our architecture diagrams, we have all these different components where we say this is where our compute will happen, this is where our models will be stored, etc. There is no box which says this is where our guardrails and our governance will sit. It's just not there yet in all the projects, but I think it's going to become the most obvious thing. There'll be a lot more investment in making the data side cleaner as well, because the training data again is not clean. um, and of course, in general, the nature of role will change. Like already we use a lot of vibe coding and all
Yeah.
these coding tools. I think engineer, as the role of an engineer will significantly change, with more of managing prompts and managing AI tools and managing teams. Teams will become more and more smaller, but
Yeah.
I don't think the jobs will go. It will just evolve into more on the management of different AI tools.
Yeah, more about agents and less human, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a great refresher course for responsible AI. I have also learned a lot of new things, and so I would, in a nutshell, I think the system should be built like a seat belt, reliable, hard to break, and tested for worst case scenarios. Do you think this is a proper
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
summarization?
I like how you summarize things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So this has been a really rich conversation about responsible AI. I think next time we should dive deeper into each pillar and to understand more about it, governance and how
Sure.
startup and the big companies can leverage and they can have everything together. Because I think it changes from startup, and as
Yeah.
population changes, it changes, I think.
Yeah.
And I think our listeners are walking away with a roadmap they are actually used, and you can make career out of it. AI responsible, because
Absolutely.
there are very few people I am seeing it. Ethical AI, responsible AI.
Yeah.
And now I think Meta's super intelligence team is bringing some glasses. You
Yeah.
are kind of I have read your post this morning about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like they are taking your cognitive abilities, they are taking your creative, that what you usually have as a natural
Yeah.
power. It's kind of you are giving it to AI. So I
Yeah.
think we need to have correct people who educate us about ethics, responsible, and this will definitely be a roadmap so they can actually use.
Yeah,
So thank you
yeah.
so much, Swagata, for sharing your time and insight with us today. Thank you so much. I really
Thank you so
appreciate
much for having me. It was lovely.
it. Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.